Okay, we're carrying on with 4.4, but we're going to specifically look at something called extensive quantities, or an extensive quantity. Now, I'll speak a little bit about an intensive quantity in a second, but what is an extensive quantity? Well, basically, before I describe it, why are we learning about extensive quantities? Because momentum is an extensive quantity. It's not an intensive quantity, it's extensive. And so there's a lot of background here to understand what an extensive quantity is. If the value of a quantity is proportional to the size or extent of the system, then it is an extensive quantity. Okay, so if it is proportional to the size of the system, then it's extensive. More specifically, this is where it becomes very applicable to momentum. If we divide the system into a number of pieces, then the sum of an extensive quantity for all the separate pieces is equal to the value of that quantity for the entire system. So, if that's your system, and this system, if you add up a certain quantity for the entire system, and you get a certain number, if it's an extensive quantity, then you can divide up this system and add up that quantity A plus B to give you the total. Okay? So this quantity is dependent on the size. That quantity changes if you split it up into certain sections. Then each section, if you add up each section, it gives you the total quantity. That is an extensive quantity. And so examples of extensive quantities are mass. Look here. If you've got say a wooden plank, okay? Do you agree with me that the mass changes if I just look at that section of the plank there? That section of the plank, the mass there is different from the total plank because the size has changed. Do you agree that the volume changes? If I just take that size of the plank, that volume is different to the entire plank. But if I add up this volume and that volume, I get the volume of the total plank. If I add up that mass plus this mass plus that mass, I get the mass of the total plank. So these are extensive quantities. The number of trees in a garden or whatever also is an extensive quantity. If you divide it up into, say, a garden or something, if you divide it up into 4, those trees plus those trees plus those trees plus those trees gives you the total number of trees. What is an intensive quantity? Density is an intensive quantity. So let's again look at the plank, a wooden plank, okay? Do you agree with me that the density of the entire plank is the same as the density of this small section here, is the same as the density of this section here? The density doesn't change depending on the size of the plank. Okay? The same with color. If you have a wall and it's got a gray color, you can't add up the gray in this section plus the gray in that section plus the gray and the gray to give you the gray of the entire section. They are intensive properties. They are independent of the size, independent of the extent. Extensive properties are dependent on the extent. Okay? Alright, so that's enough for this one. In the next video, we will talk about how do extensive quantities change.